Hi, welcome to Ask the Expert on building intelligent apps with AKS. I'm Steve Morowski. I'm your host and moderator for this event, and I have a wonderful panel here with me. Um, yeah, and I'll just run through everybody here and let them say hello and introduce themselves, and then we're going to get into your questions. So, first up, we have Sean McKenna. Sean, why don't you introduce yourself, tell folks what you do here at Microsoft, and let's go with that.
Sure. All right. Why am I here? Am I an expert? I don't know. Yeah, my name is Sean McKenna. I run the what we call the cloud native product management team here within Azure, which basically amounts to the core of what we do with Kubernetes. So that naturally includes AKS, our managed Kubernetes service, Azure Red Hat OpenShift, which is the managed OpenShift platform that we've built with Red Hat, a lot of the contributions that we do to Kubernetes Upstream, the Azure Container Registry. So really everything that has to do with Kubernetes within Azure is kind of in my wheelhouse.
Wonderful. Pavneet, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Pavneet Alwalia. I'm a principal product manager with AKS. I work with Sean here. I focus predominantly on performance, scale, and observability. So think running large clusters, scaling your workloads fast. How do you monitor them? All of that is basically my wheelhouse.
Wonderful. And my teammate, Paul Yu.
Yeah, hi everybody. Paul Yu, cloud native developer advocate here at Microsoft, and yeah, I work with Steve.
Wonderful. So we are taking your questions now. We've gotten through our introductions, and towards the very end of this event, we've got a couple of important links for you, things to follow up on, places where you can connect back to us. So let's get into our questions. So the first question that we've got coming up here is, since this is themed towards intelligent apps, why is AKS a good platform for building intelligent apps? And I'm just going to throw this out to whomever wants to jump in first, and everyone will have a chance to get their say. So let's see who wants to take it.
I'll take this one. We need a buzzer. Okay. So that
there we go.
There we go. So I would say a few things. The first is AKS we see as a great platform for all types of apps, right? So that's where I would start. And a lot of the value that we see customers deriving from running on AKS is the fact that they can run many different types of workloads, and that's sort of the motion that we see is that organizations are adopting the platform to run, whether it's containerized microservice applications, to run a front-end web application running next to large-scale batch jobs, or now as the kind of the focus of the discussion today, AI-infused apps, whether that's doing model training or then inferencing from those models. And so a lot of the value that customers are deriving is the fact that they can build a common set of processes and policies and development tools around that common platform. So that's number one. I think the second piece is that there's a lot of innovation that's happening in the open source community around AI, just given how much interest there is. And so the fact that Kubernetes is this open portable platform enables you to take a lot of that innovation and just leverage it straight away. I think we'll talk a little bit today about how you can leverage open source LLMs running in AKS, and it's very seamless to just drop them into a Kubernetes-based platform. And then the last piece is that running AI applications, again, whether it's training or inferencing, requires a lot of compute capacity and specifically GPU capacity. And AKS makes it a lot easier to both provision that compute, scale it quickly, ensure that it's performant, and allow you to deploy those applications on top of it in a really seamless manner versus kind of having to build that up from scratch. So those would be kind of the top points I would say.
Wonderful. Paul,
Yeah.
Pavneet, anything you want to?
I think Sean hit them pretty much all. Hit the nail on the head there. I mean, when it comes to like GPU provisioning, InfiniBand support. I mean, we talked a little bit about this in the workshop yesterday when we were deploying open source models. But I mean, just overall, like when we say AKS, like, yes, it's Kubernetes under the covers, and Kubernetes is like the Ferrari when it comes to like hosting microservices and scheduling workloads and infrastructure abstraction. I mean, you have all the levers at your disposal there, right? But when it comes to like AKS in general and like on the Azure platform, to me, it's like that end-to-end integration that kind of like will span your entire like ML AI workload lifecycle, right? Everything from like data ingestion to governance to identity, like all that's built into Azure. And I think that's what makes AKS specifically a good platform for intelligent apps. So
Great. Pavneet, anything else you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is when I think intelligent apps, I'm thinking how easily is it for me to go to from trained models or existing models to deploying them in the cloud and especially as a microservice. And with AKS, that becomes very easy whether you're training them or tuning them in Azure ML Studios, whether you're doing it yourself with your own, Kubeflow pipelines. All of that becomes very seamless integration with AKS, and that really reduces a lot of that burden that you might have to face on running them elsewhere.
Great. We've got a question come in from our audience. And I think this is a good question, because a lot of folks, if they're interested in intelligent apps, sometimes the first hurdle is how do I begin deploying an app for the first time? And the questioner here is talking about a Node app, but I believe we've got some things in AKS, in the AKS experience that can really help you just get that jump-started experience going. Who wants to jump in first?
I can go ahead, Paul.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just yeah, right. I need a button. Just to quickly touch on that, like I speak to folks all the time that is like just getting started with Kubernetes and AKS, and that first hurdle is always making sure that you can, or that you have a pretty good handle on how to containerize your application first, right? So it's understanding how that application should get bundled up and deployed onto whatever infrastructure, whether it's a VM or PaaS services or whatever. But you just need to make sure that you know how to containerize and bundle the application, and then from there start learning the Kubernetes constructs to actually deploy that onto a Kubernetes cluster and the AKS service in general. And I know that's like a pretty big hurdle to overcome. And so that's why like we have all sorts of tools that'll help you with that. And, we have things like the Azure Developer CLI that can help you package that stuff for you and deploy. We also have inside of the AKS portal itself on the Azure portal, like automated deployments. And so I would say give those a shot. There's also like open source tooling available, like Draft, which is also part of the Kubernetes AKS extension in VS Code. So you might be able to help and use these tools to kind of help you with that bundling and packaging process, and then help you build a manifest just to get started. And so that'll be my advice there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Specifically, what the automated deployments workflow does, and this actually builds on top of the Draft tool that Paul mentioned, is you can take an application that is not containerized yet. So I think the question was, I've got a Node.js application, right? So it's not containerized yet. You can point at the GitHub repo where you've got that application code sitting and have that experience generate the necessary Docker file to containerize the app, push it into the Azure Container Registry, which is where you need to store that container image, then create the necessary manifests to be able to deploy the application into a Kubernetes environment inside of AKS. And then the nice thing is that it actually also creates a pull request into your GitHub repo, so that not only do you deploy the application one time, but you're actually set up to be able to, as you continue to modify and enhance that application, have those changes pushed into that AKS cluster. So it sets you up even for that kind of day two experience. And it does all of that, in a matter of just a couple of clicks. And so even though you may not yet be an expert on how to containerize the app, how to deploy it into Kubernetes, it kind of sets up that entire pipeline for you. And then obviously you can go back, and as you learn more and become more sophisticated with Kubernetes, you can go and tweak that and enhance it to your heart's content, but it kind of gets you up and running very quickly.
Great. Pavneet, anything that you wanted to add there, or Sean?
Yeah, I would just add a shameless plug. Put that same question in Azure Copilot, and you'll get a lot of in-depth answers on how to do things. So please go and try that as well.
Yeah, so that brings up a great question. So you mentioned Azure Copilot. So how are we using AI to improve our users' experience with AKS?
I'll take this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll let you start with this one. You started it off.
Yeah, sure. So the way we think about it, there are multiple streamlines in that, right? Our goal is how can we add intelligence and make the user interface and the interaction simpler, so that you have to make less decisions and you have to think less about Googling and searching about how to do things in your AKS end-to-end experience, right? And really the first foray into that is the Azure Copilot, where we're starting with the basics of the experience, which is you have questions while you're running your applications. When you're setting up your clusters, you can go and ask those questions to Copilot as your AI assistant. And as we move forward, we are adding more and more capabilities into the Copilot, where, for instance, soon we are working on several features which will help you troubleshoot your issues in Copilot, and take it further, where you can even trigger actions through Copilot with explicit permissions. So the way we see it is Copilot will really become your additional hand in getting through a lot of your day one, day two ops on AKS. In a separate stream, what we're really thinking about is, okay, this is where areas where you can actually interact with AKS through a Copilot or through an AI assisted experience, right? How can we actually under the hood make the experience better for you? And there we're really thinking about how do we make troubleshooting and remediating some of the issues faster and seamless under the hood, so that you don't even have to ask the questions or worry about those issues. And similarly, how can we tune the AKS both from a control plane or from a data plane point of view to make it faster using machine learning? So the most obvious use case that some of you encounter is cluster autoscaler tuning, right? How can we make it go faster or tune it towards cost optimization, so that you don't have to think about, okay, what is the profile setting that I need to set on cluster autoscaler to get the most out of it? So those are just some of the examples that we are exploring. There's a lot of work happening in that space, and I'm really excited on what's coming in the next KubeCon and at Build as well.
Yeah, I'd say obviously we're a little bit biased, but we think Copilot in the Kubernetes space and the AKS space has one of the largest potentials for sort of transforming user experiences, in the sense that, yeah, as Pavneet mentioned, when you're troubleshooting an issue, certainly as a newcomer to the platform, that can be exceptionally challenging. There is a lot of data to look at. It's not often, or not always at least, clear where exactly the issue is between your application, Kubernetes, the infrastructure that sits underneath it. And so, when you look at one of those issues, it's a little hard to know even where to get started. Now, a lot of people may have had the experience of, you've got somebody that's very experienced and sophisticated with Kubernetes, and they come in and they go like, okay, let me look over here. Okay, I can see that there's a connection to this. I'll go look at these logs, and within a few minutes they've got it sorted out. You're like, how did they figure that out? And it's because they've got a lot of experience being able to go through that data and see those types of patterns. So now imagine that you can bring Copilot in to enable anybody to do that without necessarily having to have years and years of SRE experience working with Kubernetes. Like, that is just incredibly powerful and transformational in how you can leverage the underlying platform.
Yeah, and that learning, using the Copilot for the learning, I think is really key there. I remember, was it 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, Brian Redmond and I, we're going through Azure Copilot in the portal, and we're literally just, we have our AKS cluster or the blade up, and then we bring up the Azure Copilot, and we're literally just asking it questions like, hey, how do I do this? Or how do I enable LTS on my Kubernetes cluster? And what it'll do is it'll actually just think about it and prompt the Copilot, or it'll ask the Copilot, and then it'll come back with like an explanation with resource links that'll take you to the docs that kind of help you walk you through that. So in addition to like giving you commands, giving you YAML, I mean, it literally does the research for you. So I don't know. I'm starting to sway more towards using that as opposed to doing like Bing searches or Google searches for stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I do like that sourcing that it provides. And one thing, Paul, I think that you mentioned there, that if for anyone who's trying out this Copilot capability, make sure you're on the blade of the thing that you have a question about. The experience will be much better.
Context.
Because it provides that additional context, and so that was something that I thought was interesting from when you and Brian had demoed it the other day or last week.
Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. Let's keep moving on. Now, let's we had a mention earlier about open source models. So can you run open source large language models on AKS?
I feel like that's a question for me.
Yeah, well, let's go with that.
Yeah. I only said that because I was on a live stream with Ishan Segal from the AKS engineering team yesterday in Learn Live episode. So if you haven't checked that out, I would say go back to either the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel or the AKS community YouTube channel. The recording is there. Just to answer pretty simply, yes, you can run open source models on your Azure Kubernetes cluster. And there's a neat operator that Microsoft has open source called Kaito, which is an acronym for Kubernetes AI Toolchain Operator. Basically, it's an operator that'll help you reduce the time to inference, right? Using just one single custom resource that you deploy into the cluster. This thing will literally provision a GPU node, configure it with all the device plugins, and then actually deploy the model and set up an inferencing endpoint for you. So it's a pretty neat tool. I would highly suggest that you go check it out. But yeah, you can definitely bring open source models to your AKS cluster. There are preset models for you that's available, like popular ones based on popularity on Hugging Face, but like Falcon models, Llama 2 models, those are available as presets. But then of course you could bring your own as well.
Yeah, and I believe you can recommend new or suggest new ones for folks. Sean, I believe it was you mentioned, when we were talking about running intelligent apps and like the GPU, setting up GPU based nodes and things. How do you think that, or how much complexity does Kaito seem to remove from getting those models up and running?
A lot. We find certainly if you're trying to set up compute without using AKS at all to do AI training or inferencing, there's quite a bit of DIY steps that are required. So AKS certainly makes that a lot easier as a baseline, and then Kaito layers on top things like initiating node auto provisioning. So where you've got the model deployed, rather than you having to go figure out, okay, what type of nodes, what types of VMs do I need to actually do this inferencing, it will just go and provision the right set of infrastructure for you from within the Azure IaaS catalog, if you will. So that simplifies right out of the gate getting a cluster up and running with the right baseline set of hardware, and then also provisioning and wiring up the necessary GPU drivers, and just making sure that you've got that platform ready to go to start doing the inferencing. So actually getting to solving the real problem that you're trying to work on versus having to do a bunch of upfront.
Awesome. Pavneet, anything else that you can think of that might be interesting around running open source LLMs on AKS?
No, I think Paul and Sean covered it. Go try out Kiddo. I was blown away when I first used it. So yeah. It's a pretty awesome tool.
All right. So we just talked about that we can run these open source LLMs, and so I think that kind of answers this question. But a question that I've come across from a few folks, like, do I have to use Azure OpenAI for building intelligent apps with AKS?
I can, yeah.
We gave the answer before the question.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. And so I think, and actually I think the even the sample, the quick start in our docs has options with OpenAI and Azure OpenAI, right? So wherever whatever model you're using or endpoints you're using, right? You can. AKS is a good platform, I think, for building those intelligent apps.
Yeah, I think one thing that is good, Sean.
No, go for it.
One thing that is not as well known maybe is how well Azure ML and AKS integrates with each other, where you can actually deploy your model from Azure ML into AKS, and that, as you're iterating in Azure ML Studios, fine-tuning your models, that really opens up the options that you're looking at, whether you're building it yourself using OpenAI's GPT models or even open source models.
Yeah, that's an area I don't know nearly enough about, and probably should be educating myself on how well those services integrate. Fortunately, I've got some team members that know a little bit about that, so
maybe we need to do another video just on that.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing I would add is, obviously we've been talking about how you can run open source models and how you can run it in the context of your Kubernetes cluster. And that's a little bit about ensuring that that misconception is maybe cleared up, that's not possible, or that you absolutely have to use Azure OpenAI. I would say though, if you're just getting started and you're sort of like, hey, I'm hearing all about AI and intelligent apps and kind of where do I get started, like I would definitely recommend trying to leverage the hosted services, because as much as we make it simpler to do it inside of AKS, it's always even that much simpler to just hit a REST endpoint, right? So I think we had the question about, I've just got this Node.js application, how do I get started in there? The sample that you referenced earlier that we've got up in our docs basically takes an existing application and ties it into the Azure OpenAI endpoint to do some basic inferencing, taking some keywords for a product and then being able to generate a longer description of it. So that's a great one to look at as a starting point, and it's just leveraging the managed service. So that's kind of where I would suggest getting started. And then, hey, if you actually now want to go get more sophisticated, start getting opinionated about which models you want to be using, just know that the platform is there and is ready for you, but you don't necessarily need to start there.
I think that's a really good point. So we are getting down towards the last five or 6 minutes that we have. I've got a couple more questions here queued up, but for folks who are watching, if you want to get your questions answered, please get them in the chat in the very near term. All right, so one question that we've got here is, and this isn't necessarily as specific to intelligent apps, but just, and I'll ask each one of you this. But what is the most important but not widely known feature in AKS? And we'll start with you, Sean.
This is a great question, because we find oftentimes we talk to people and they'll tell us, hey, I wish AKS could do this. And we say, actually, it can. We shipped that feature 6 months ago. So there's a lot of choices here. The one that I often tell people about that they're surprised is is the diagnose and solve problems experience inside of the portal. We talked a little bit about the challenges of troubleshooting issues, particularly for newcomers. And so, anytime you have an issue with your cluster, with your application, I always recommend people start there. And what that experience does is it'll actually run through a series of checks and looking at all of the data that we've got about your environment and looking for common issues that people run into where they might have misconfigured something, or the applications got into a weird state. Maybe they're over provisioning, oversaturating their nodes. It's a common challenge that we see people run into. And so it's pretty good at hitting a lot of the typical issues that people run into. And really all of the checks that we include in that experience are built off of support case data that we've seen, where we see like, okay, this is a pattern that a lot of people are running into. Let's go add an additional check in there. So that's always one that people are surprised to learn about and often find useful.
Awesome. Pavneet, what would you say is the most important but not widely known feature?
So Sean took mine, so I'll have to think of a new one.
Right.
But I would say auto upgrades. Whether you're thinking Kubernetes upgrade or Node.OS upgrade, and while customers might be aware of it, I do feel Kubernetes upgrades is the elephant in most discussions that I enter, right? And then when I ask customers, they say, no, we don't use auto upgrades, right? And that's where I would say, take a look, right? You can make your life a lot easier with Kubernetes, and LTS is obviously the Uber option there. But also auto upgrades can make your life easier. We are doing a lot of work in making auto upgrades safer and safer for you, whether that's API deprecation, catching deprecated APIs in your clusters, whether that's adding soak time in between upgrade steps so that you can check everything is okay, right? That auto upgrade option is really becoming the biggest single toolkit in your chain when running AKS and Kubernetes on Azure. So take a look, and we welcome your feedback if there's anything that you need that's not there.
And just to catch LTS is long-term support.
Yeah.
So all right, Paul, we've got just a short time here. What is your what's your pick here for the most important but least widely known?
Yeah, those two are some really good picks there. I would say, like, I would probably piggyback along the lines of security and workload identity from your AKS cluster, right?
Yeah.
So being on the Azure platform in general, and if you're taking advantage of Azure PaaS services like either data services or OpenAI, for instance, being able to authenticate in a passwordless manner between your application and the Azure services, I think is pretty neat because storing password or API keys anywhere inside your application is not a good thing. So I would say workload identity.
That I like workload identity. So if we could just go to our resources slide, there's a couple of things I want to point out to folks before we have to sign off. So we currently have a Learn Live series going on. There have been 2 episodes the last 2 weeks, all on building intelligent apps. And so you can catch more of Paul and other members of the AKS team talking about a couple of topics there. We've got 2 more coming up in the next 2 weeks. If you want to continue to engage with us, join us on the AKS community on YouTube. We've got more content coming out there. Happy to hear from you. If you want to join us in person, we've got the AKS Essentials Day on March 18th, just before KubeCon EU, and we have Azure Day as one of the pre-days on March 19th. So we'd love to see you out there in person. Otherwise, thank you so much, Sean, Paul, Pavneet. I appreciate you all, and we will catch you later.